Thank you for tuning in to the Movie Geeks United 10th anniversary celebration of Terrence Malick's The New World. Terrence Malick became a darling of the 70s New Hollywood with two incredibly distinctive and lyrical masterpieces, Badlands and Days of Heaven. Then, just like a modern-day cinematic Howard Hughes, the ever-enigmatic and elusive Malick disappeared into the shadows, leaving film culture to contend with his place in the pantheon with such limited output. That self-imposed sabbatical was broken in 1998 with the release of the haunting and existential The Thin Red Line, as unique and meditative a war film as movie audiences had ever seen. 7 years later, in 2005, he returned again with The New World, a hugely ambitious spectacle involving the founding of Jamestown, Virginia, and the tale of Captain John Smith and Pocahontas. The film is filled with Malickian trademarks, and its mixture of savagery and romance are brought to life with painstakingly rendered painterly visuals and nonverbal moments of transcendence. In this 10th anniversary celebration of the film, we comb through the vaults of our sister podcast, Back by Midnight, and courtesy of host Aaron Adediaz, we bring you these two interviews connected to the film, with production designer and longtime Terrence Malick counterpart Jack Fisk, and critic Matt Zoller Seitz. Enjoy.
But I think that's one of the things that attracted me to Terry when I heard about this man that was preparing a film to take place in the 50s. I started thinking, oh, that would be fun to do another period. And I just started prepping the film, not knowing very much about it, but the Starkweather case, and I started doing a lot of research on the 50s, and then I think Terry heard about this guy that was preparing his film. And a mutual friend of ours, Bill Scott, set up a meeting, and we got along. Luckily, we got along and started working together.
Well, it would seem that with Malick's reputation that he would be rather impressed by someone taking initiative on prepping a film that he wasn't, yet starting the film, and on someone who was prepping a film that he hadn't even met. Was he just impressed by that initiative that you've taken?
I think that when you're making a film, and this would have been his first feature film, you're looking for anybody that wants to be on your team, on your side. And, a positive enthusiasm is sort of the best-selling card for anybody wanting to get into this business. And I think that's what he responded to.
Well, let's talk about Badlands real quick. And that the thing that I remember from Badlands is, that it's a very spare film, and there's no clutter in the backgrounds or even in the foregrounds. It's always two people at the most, two people, or if it's during one of the killings, we get a couple or something. But for the most part, it's always two people in the frame, and then you get this vastness. And so I was wondering on the production, on the art directing and production design, was one of the edicts to take away from the frame instead of filling it?
Because we had such a low budget, I think my art budget on that film was $10,000, and we didn't have money to put anything in, so I found that you could get some sort of style by taking stuff away and just leaving sort of an essence. I find in the paintings of Edward Hopper, he does it so beautifully, is that there's just the minimum amount of information there. So when you look around a room, the stuff you see is important, and you're not trying to understand clutter while you're, you're involved in a scene in a film.
Well, and so Badlands was in '73, and it's an amazing debut. And then, you went back and did some more Cormans, and then in '76, you do Carrie, which is talk about another director who's famous for detail, Brian De Palma. And
right.
What was it because of your work on Badlands and the Corman stuff that De Palma?
I think I did Phantom of the Paradise before I did Carrie.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
And I remember that Ed Pressman was a producer on Badlands, and he was producing this film with Brian De Palma, so he wanted me, to be on it. And the first day I met Brian, he kind of looks at me and what have you done? Who are you? And I said, well, I just work with Terry Malick, but I really didn't have any credits that would impress a director, because at that time Badlands hadn't been released. Or, it started in the editing process. But we started working together, looking at locations and doing sketches and stuff, and we became good friends. Brian was from Philadelphia, and I'd gone to school in Philadelphia at the Pennsylvania Academy, and it just something about it clicked. That where some people were kind of wary of Brian because of his sort of quiet, scowling ways, I found it humorous, and it just sometimes I think so much of making films and making lasting relationships is chemistry. I loved working with Brian.
Well, I got to ask about, obviously, I'm assuming the big thing that, the big set piece that was for, kind of the thing that the art department had to really work on was the gymnasium for the dance. Was that the big showpiece?
On Carrie.
On Carrie?
Yeah, that was a big set because it was shot with a crane. And, it was a large crane, so it had to fit in there, and it had to look realistic to be a gymnasium. And we were shooting, I believe, at Producer's Studio, which is a studio where they shot Citizen Kane. And it's a great old studio in Culver City. And we filled up one of the stages with that gym set. And we rehearsed the main scene of the blood falling down as a complicated shot. I think we rehearsed that for a day or a day and a half, and then shot it. And I think we shot it maybe 20 times, but it was all engineered before and worked beautifully. But Brian loved to make storyboards of every scene, and then he very seldom varied from them in the shooting. And it was so different from the organic way that Terry works. Because Brian, he had little note cards in his office just all around the room with stick figures on it. And I think that was the exciting part for him at the time in filmmaking, was to create it there in his office, in his head.
Now, I just need to confirm a piece of trivia that I think I read somewhere. Is it true that one of the people working for you in the department on Carrie was Bill Paxton?
Yeah, I've worked with Bill on quite a few films.
Wow.
And Bill was he was a young kid from Texas. And he didn't mind staying up all night working, and he was a hard worker and a lot of fun to have around.
Well, and so Carrie comes out and it's a big hit, but I'm assuming when Carrie is being released at that time, you're in the midst of prep on Days of Heaven, if I'm not mistaken. Is that true? How did the Days of Heaven job come to you again?
Days of Heaven, was that the one that was 20 years later?
No,
that was okay. Yeah,
it felt 20 years later.
Yeah, that came. I think right after Phantom of the Paradise. I'm not sure. I think I just went from one Badlands to Phantom of the Paradise, and then back to Days of Heaven. Days of Heaven was interesting because after Phantom was done mostly on soundstage, and we shot in New York and Los Angeles and Texas, a lot of stuff in Texas. When Terry called me about Days of Heaven, we started looking for locations, and one of the main criteria of the film was these wheat fields was going to be really important. And Terry, had hoped to start shooting, in the southern United States or Southwest, and move up with the harvest. And he wanted to build a large house for Sam Shepard's character, but it would have involved us being able to put it into a truck and move it to the next location and set it up. And it wasn't anything we could do on our budget. But the saving grace for me was that by the time we got going, it was so late that the only place there was any wheat that hadn't been harvested was up in Canada. And we found some great wheat up there that belonged to the Hutterite farmers, and it was an old-style wheat that got about 4 feet or 4.5 feet. It was just beautiful, and we were able to make a deal with them to shoot in their fields. But the problem was that the wheat was going to be harvested in 6 weeks, and Terry said he'd like to shoot the wheat for 2 weeks before they did any harvesting. So that meant we had to, and he also wanted to shoot from inside the house looking out and around the outside of the house. So it meant that all the sets had to be done in 4 weeks' time. And that's pretty quick if anyone's ever built a house, done any construction. And I was still pretty much a novice, and I got some friends together that had a set company in L.A., and we loaded up our tools and went to Canada. And on the way there, I was doing the drawings for the house on the airplane. We arrived at this Hutterite farm, and there were no roads even into the location. That the producer had found the location by helicopter, and so we ended up having to put in roads just to be able to get the wood in to build a house. And out up there in this, it was southern Alberta, it would get so windy, 3/4-inch sheets of plywood could just like fly through the air. But we were young and didn't think anything was impossible, and I was exhausted by the end of that film just from the impossibility of it. But it worked out well. We got everything ready 2 weeks in before the harvest, and the Hutterites were great. They would come up and bring dandelion wine that they made, and the old men in the community were taking bets that there was no way we could get it done. But we became good friends with him.
I gotta ask about. I'm broadcasting out of San Antonio, Texas. So
great.
I gotta ask about Raggedy Man, which is your directorial.
We shot that up in Maxwell, Texas, in Lockhart. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I said at the top, it is one of the lost great movies of the 1980s. I recommend anyone getting it. Sissy Spacek obviously is amazing, and a great kind of a sensation, Eric Roberts. Very low-key performance, very sweet performance by Eric Roberts. And this was your director, and obviously Henry Thomas.
That was his first film.
First film coming out of here, and just an amazing performance.
And Carrie Clyde Hollis played his little brother.
And so it's your first directing, and it's also, if I'm not mistaken, Sissy Spacek's first film after winning for Coal Miner's Daughter. So what was that like to now be a director and having to, kind of relinquish a little bit of that control of the production design, which is what you had done, but now you got to collaborate with someone else who's doing that work and not try to, take over that job. But now that you're a director, I
know I didn't envy the art director who was working with me because I had an idea of how it should look, and which is great if you can get that information from a director. And I thought they did a great job. We found a little town in Maxwell which was pretty much abandoned, and I worked with Bill Whitliff, the writer. He lives in Austin, Texas, and he just had written I thought was a real touching story, and had so many visual ideas. He's also a photographer and an artist in his own right. So it I don't know. I found it easy to work with art directors. I think sometimes if the director is visual, that it's almost easier to work with them. I know when I work with David Lynch, David and I went to art school together. It's very easy to communicate because he understands construction and he understands building, design, and so with just a few scratches on paper or word, much is conveyed.
Mm-hmm. Well, you bring up David Lynch, and if I'm not mistaken, you were, I think, you had a bit part in Eraserhead, and you're somewhere. I think you were somewhat on the crew. but then y'all's first collaboration, I believe, was The Straight Story.
Yeah, I was just going to say, David and I went to art school together. We went to high school together, then we went to art school together in Philadelphia. And so we were real competitive. I mean, we love each other, but it was like we couldn't work on the same art projects. And I was in Eraserhead. Alan Splett was supposed to play that part, but I think he got a cold or something happened, and he couldn't do it, so I was like a last-minute replacement for the Man in the Planet. And I remember I had just started to grow a beard, and it was like about day 6 or something, and David had this idea for the character that his skin would be all rough and pocky and stuff. So David is a great visualist, but he didn't know a lot about movie techniques at the time, so he would use industrial plastics and applications to do what they could probably do kinder, in Hollywood.
Right.
And he put this plastic all over my face to get this rough skin, and it was just no way to get it off with the, he had locked into the beard. It was like solid. I remember having to shave, like in boiling hot water in a bathtub to try and get the plastic off.
Well, you say y'all are competitive. So what was it like when you get that call and he says, you know what, I want you to be the production designer on my next movie? What was that when the Straight Story came up?
Oh, I was really excited because I had grown up and we'd both David had been so successful, so it was we actually looked forward to working together, and we've stayed pretty close since then. We were always buddies. I mean, I would help do put up some money for Eraserhead. I'd go off and do films as an art director and then give him some money because he was working for nothing.
Right.
And that film was made, I think, for $50,000. And he was living in the stables at the Doheny Institute at the time, and unknown to anyone else. So he would work at night. In the daytime, he would his crew would lock him into an office in the stables. So if anybody came by, they'd just see a padlocked room, not knowing that David was in there. But he said he had a secret way he could slip out and climb down the back if there was an emergency. So it was.
Well, in these intervening years after Days of Heaven in '78, you're doing other films as a director and production designer. Were you in communication with Terrence Malick about projects that he was wanting to do before?
Is this a 20-year period?
Yeah, the 20-year period.
Yeah. I hadn't had much contact with Terry. Right after Days of Heaven, I met with him and Patty Norris, and he wanted to do a film about cavemen. And I got really excited, and then he just sort of disappeared. And I heard great stories, in the next 20 years. People say, "Oh, I saw him selling T-shirts at the Austin, Texas University Stadium." Somebody else said he was cutting hair in France. I remember we were at Cannes one year, and they said, "Oh, Terry Malick, he cuts my hair in Paris." And he became such a fantasy that I loved it, and I look forward to seeing him and talking to him one day, but he just seemed impossible to find. And then I was in Ireland. My oldest daughter Skylar was doing a film over there, and we went to a party in Dublin. And I was at the party, and this one film critic there came up to me. He started talking about this film that Terry Malick was making, The Thin Red Line, and how excited he was that he was making another film. And I suddenly found myself getting real jealous, thinking that somebody else might be working with Terry. And I called. I sent a telegram to his agent, to Terry through his agent, saying, "I've just recovered from Days of Heaven, and I'd love to work with you again." And about a month later, we met in L.A. at a friend's house, and I think a few days later, I was off to Guadalcanal to shoot some footage for him.
So what was that? What was that like? Terrence Malick says, "Well, I need to recreate Guadalcanal for the battle. I need you to do production design to get it to look like it looked in 1943, 44. So, how daunting was that task? Obviously, this was probably, I'm assuming at this time, this was going to be your biggest budget for production design?
I think it's one of the biggest budgets I've ever worked on. It was shot in Australia, but when he first approached me about it, I didn't know anything about World War II, and that's what I love about period films is you start to research, and I created such a library of books and tapes and swatches of fabric and other information, interviews, that I became more knowledgeable, and I guess I didn't really think about the scale, but when we started doing it, it's a couple of times. I remember the day before shooting, or 2 days before shooting, I drove Terry over to this outdoor tennis court where we built the interior of a troop ship, and just to show him how many vehicles were there, because he kept talking about making a small film. And I went over there, and it looked like the world's largest circus or something, or so many trucks and trailers and people. And he says, "Oh, I thought it was a small film." Terry, you didn't write a small film. He seemed so surprised that it was going to take this many people to build it and to create the film. And even during the movie, he kept saying, "Oh, I wish we had a crew like Badlands, 35 people." But instead we had about 235.
Well, and so then Red Line comes out, and it's a great film. It's a great looking film, and it's a real return of greatness from Malick. And then I remember immediately people kept saying, "Well, I hope we don't have to wait another 20 years," and it turned out we didn't. So what happens? I'm assuming a couple of years later, you get a call or a telegram saying, "Well, I need to recreate Jamestown now."
That I was working on Mulholland Drive, and Terry called me and said he wanted me to go with him to look at locations for a different film that hasn't been made yet. And I think it'll be our next film together. But we spent 4 years looking at locations, and then I was looking for locations for Che, down in Bolivia, and it was a great exercise. Terry had been in Bolivia at the time of Che, I think reporting for Newsweek or I think it was Newsweek, and but he'd just been around the court, the trial, and he wanted me to go by and see what the real area looked like. So I got to go down and retrace Che's whole journey through Bolivia from his encampment to ended up in the schoolhouse where he was executed, and it was great. And we were really excited about the film, and very close to doing it. But then one day Terry said, "I got another idea for a film that we could make in your neck of the woods," because I live in Virginia, and it was the New World, and I didn't know which one was going to go first, and I think it had to do more with the insurance company than anything else. They were, Bolivia scares people, and I wanted to shoot in Bolivia because it's such a beautiful country, and the people are so great. They're just they're so, I could see where Che would have a problem because nobody wants to revolt there. Even though it probably has more coups than any country in the history of the world, the people are just sweet,
right.
Farmers, and even when I was down there, every little village I'd go into the market, there'd be a picture of Jesus and a picture of Che side by side. They love the man.
Right.
Anyway, but then but the New World happened, and I was excited because after 40 years in the business, it was the first time I'd gotten to work in Virginia.
And so what was the logistics of creating the colony, and what were some of the key things that needed to be that needed to be really constructed and had to be there? What were some of kind of the key obstacles in creating the colony? That
Dr. Kelso, archaeologist, he discovered the fort in 1996. They didn't even know where the fort was, and the people had put together a fort in the 50s. The Yorktown Foundation put together a fort of what they thought it looked like. And I was always sort of suspect that they could come over, quite that organized. And I remember seeing some refugee camps in Beirut back in the early 70s. And it seemed more like when people come into a new country, they're just like hanging on, which the Jamestown experience, I think, was. And I started researching all the writings from the Jamestown narratives that the different settlers and leaders had written, and I started working with Dr. Kelso at the the site of the original fort, which, as it turns out, was only about 5 miles from where we ended up shooting the film. And I got so excited by the things that they were discovering there, the wattle and daub houses and the way they lived, and the Indians were like actually in the forts with them. I think that the realism of this history being discovered just overtook me, and I just wanted to recreate it. I just wanted to be there. And Dr. Kelso got so excited that while we were building, he'd bring students by to show them how they constructed buildings, at the time, based on their findings. And it just, I don't know, is one of the highlights of putting together sets for me. The locations just magically came together. Terry had told me about the Chickahominy River, and I went down there for the first time with a friend on a jet ski and ended up finding our two principal locations the first day there. I knew for the fort we needed deep water because we wanted to bring the ships close to shore, right, like it's described in the narratives. And we found a bend in the river where in the Revolutionary times, they used to build ships there, and then they put them in the water. But right now, or when I found it, there was a fish house there, and they'd used for cleaning fish, but it had been abandoned. So there was, once again, there was more stuff to take away before we could start to build. But the state of Virginia and Mark Warner, who was then governor, got behind it and gave us a lot of support, and the owners of the land, consented to let us build the fort there, and it just fit together beautifully. Yeah.
It's an amazing piece of production design. I mean, it really does seem like history comes to life in the film. And it's a terrific film. Well, and I got to ask about, switching gears here a little, about There Will Be Blood. What was that like? Once again, living here in San Antonio, Marfa, Texas, I don't know if you're aware, but a buddy of mine put together the first annual Marfa Film Festival this past May.
Oh, and they had it outside.
Yeah, and they had it outside, and they had
on the ranch.
And the set was still there, and so they showed There Will Be Blood in the set that was still there. So people were kind of excited they could still walk around and see, basically, you're watching the movie and you turn around and like, oh, there's the scene. Kind of deal.
That's so great! I wish I could have been there.
So how did you get that job? Because I mean, for some people, for the new generation of film buffs and film critics, P.T. Anderson was some in the press had said he's pulling a Malick. It was going on 5 years and we without a film, and then the film that he comes up with is just one of these monumental pieces of work that'll it's a benchmark. So how did he contact you for that, and what was his initial ideas that he wanted?
I was in London, just finishing up the New World, the English part, and I got a phone call from Daniel Lupe, the producer. He says, Paul Thomas Anderson wants you to work on his next picture. It was just like that. I said, great. So I went out and bought all of his films and started watching them, and then about a month later, I ended up meeting up with Paul at the Burbank airport, and we flew to Texas to look for locations for the film. And that's the first time I'd met him was at the airport. And he's got a great sense of humor, and I think we just got along. We spent a lot of time together, walking through the Texas landscape. And we went to New Mexico. You know, they were giving tax incentives there, and everybody wanted us to shoot there. But we found this ranch outside of Marfa that just, you know, spoke to us, and I think sort of, I don't know, it looked like it'd be a hard place to live, and that was perfect for the Daniel Plainview character. But we realized sort of after that first meeting that we wanted to shoot there, but that there was no way we could have the film ready to go by May. I think that was like March or February, March. And Daniel Day-Lewis could only work in the summer months because he wanted to have his kids nearby, so he wouldn't work during the school year. So we put it off for a year. And then I went and did another film, and
The Invasion.
Yeah, I went and did The Invasion, and then met him back there a year later, and we started erecting that derrick.
Tell me about that, because it's probably one of the great. It's one of the big set pieces in the film, the fire, if you will. And if I'm not mistaken, I saw an interview with Paul Thomas Anderson saying that people were kind of heartbroken when they spent all this time building it, and then they got this one shot where it has to go up in flames and be destroyed, and they were kind of heartbroken when it was destroyed after all that work. Tell me about that piece of that's like a big prop, if you will. Was that through a lot of going through photos of what these things look like and trying to get it period accurate?
Yeah, I'd visited all the oil derrick remnants in California. They built one in Kern, and then there was an old one in Bakersfield, and spent a lot of time around there and documented. Paul had seen all this stuff, you know, writing. He put together such a massive research in his writing. He's just like so involved, and then we decided what we wanted to build, but there was going to be, you know, we walked around this ranch, and of course picked the most difficult place to build it was be on the side of a hill, and and then we met this great effects person, Steve Kremens, who you know, was in charge of, you know, making it look like it's working and the burning it down. So we worked closely together, and we found a lot of great old-time oil people in Odessa, Midland, Odessa area. And there's a couple of them there that they were just so generous. They brought us pipe. They brought us steam engines. They you know, everybody was like pitching in to, you know, to give us the props and stuff we needed to make the film. It was great. It's one of those, you know, those old like Mickey Rooney movies where he goes, "I got a stage, let's put on a show," you know. and I remember this one old timer, he said, "The last good movie I ever saw was Gone with the Wind." And he was afraid this one wouldn't live up to it. So.
Well, before I let you, I gotta ask. I don't know how much you're allowed to talk, but I gotta ask about Tree of Life, the new Malick film, which you, if I'm not mistaken, you've just wrapped. It's in post-production. And,
yeah.
Where was that shot?
That was shot outside of Austin, in a little town, Smithville. We took over the whole town, and this is such an important film to Terry. You know, I think, you know, I've been working with him for almost 40 years, and I think this is the film that he's most wanted to make. And his approach to filmmaking just keeps evolving. I kept thinking on Days of Heaven that, well, one day he's going to make a film with no dialogue. But, you know, we made this film, you know, present day with hardly any lighting, you know, and there was, you know, the scripts, you know, people were working without scripts. He was, you know, he would dole them out and then take them back. And, you know, he just, things were evolving and changing. I think it was Terry is most exciting. And he seemed stronger and more inventive than, you know, than any time in the last 40 years. He just, I saw some dailies. We didn't print much in the way of dailies, except Chivo, our cameraman, Manuel Lebeski. He would, if he was worried about something we shot because we didn't have light, he'd want to print it to look at it. So our dailies consisted of all the stuff he was worried about, and there was never any sound. But when I see this footage, it looked like you had found some film left over from the 50s. The story took place in the 50s, and and it was just magical. And it's just not structured like a regular film. Mm-hmm. I think it's gonna. I think it could change some parts of cinema. I'm just so excited about it, and I told Terry, a couple of weeks ago, I said, it's gonna make it really hard to work on another film now because they look like films, and this one looks different. But it's not coming out till 2010, or the end of 2009.
Oh,
so
wow.
He loves the editing, and I know he's still shooting some little supplements for it.
Right. And what about you? What are you doing next? Are you gonna try directing again anytime soon?
I really love building environments, building settings and designing stuff. So I don't have any plans for directing, but there's been this pending actor strike in Hollywood, and the studios are so scared to start up anything of size because of the latest I heard is originally they were going to strike in June, and so we worked on our film to be done by June, and then now they're thinking of striking in January. It's like, and I really feel bad for the film industry because it's suffering. There's just not a lot being done, that could employ people because of the pending strike. The studios don't want to get caught within it. And then we also have this new economic crisis, so it's
right.
For borrowing money is kind of scary. But I've been building a new wood shop on my farm and converting a barn into a wood shop and just having a blast and loving it. So that's been keeping me busy. But
right. Well, that sounds well. And I got to ask just on a general question that you joined the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences this year. So now you're a voter. So I'm curious of what do you think of some of the highlights of the last couple of years? Has there been a film or art direction that has really kind of blown you away in its detail? I know for me, I was kind of last year of 2007, my favorite film of the year was David Fincher's Zodiac, and I thought it had some of the most remarkable art direction, set decoration.
David Fincher is fabulous, and Jackie West just worked with him on Benjamin Button. I suspect that's going to be great. Mm-hmm. I love the Ang Lee film that came out last year too.
Oh, Lust Caution. Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought it was beautiful. And in the past I've loved some English films. I like that one. It's about the woman that did abortions.
Vera Drake, Mike Lee.
Vera Drake. Yeah, I just thought that was so beautifully done.
Have you seen his new one yet? The Happy Go Lucky?
No, I haven't. And I haven't seen many films this year because I've been working with Terry.
Right.
But I'm looking forward to it. The Academy sends out films starting about now, so we get to see them all in one sort of like clump. It's a great way to do it. I liked Iron Man. I saw that the other day. I thought that was great.
Yeah. And well, how do you feel about? I guess here's a general. How do you feel about some of these? I guess the large scale production designers that on these tentpole movies. That they're given they have tons of people working under them, but they also have to be period accurate or detail accurate. And how do you what is there? Do you feel that there's no people shouldn't the quality of work is paramount, and that it doesn't it doesn't mean if you're on a low budget film you're quote unquote have more kind of integrity. Do you not buy into that philosophy? That
I think the bigger it gets, it's probably harder to control and maintain, but it excites me a lot. I hope to do that.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Fisk, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to us about your work as art director and production designer. It's a remarkable body of work. You should be really proud. And as a filmmaker, like I said, Raggedy Man and Violets Are Blue are just remarkable films.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I feel fortunate to be able to work in this industry.
Yes.
And I've enjoyed talking with you, Aaron.
I appreciate it, Mr. Fisk.
Okay. Good night.
On New Year's 2006, he launched the website The House Next Door, a long, strange journey toward a retrospectively inevitable destination. It was started in part as a forum for thoughtful analysis of the New World. It quickly became one of the best places on the web for criticism. Movies, music, trends in pop culture, politics make up one of the liveliest daily conversations anywhere, print or online. Members of the Internet generation of critics, or Interneters as they've been dubbed by some old media gatekeepers, have been given the freedom to let their voices be heard at the house next door. They include Keith Ulick, Vadim Rezoff, John Lichtman, Kevin B. Lee, Jeremiah Kipp, and Stephen Boone. Earlier this year, Editor-in-Chief Matt Zoller Seitz relinquished the day-to-day duties to Keith Ulick in order to pursue his passion in filmmaking. Tonight, his journey has led him inevitably back to where it all started. Joining the discussion of the New World Extended Cut, it is my pleasure to welcome a kindred spirit in this thing we call movie love. Matt Zoller Seitz is on Back by Midnight.
Hey, Aaron, can you hear me?
How you doing? How you doing, my man?
Good. Doing all right. I've had complete and total equipment failure here at my house. So much for the brave new world. Computer is down, and then modem is down as well. So I'm back to the 20th century. How are you doing?
I'm doing terrific. So New World. So like I said, you launched The House Next Door in part as a way to kind of beat the drum for the excitement you felt for the New World.
Yeah, well, it is still. I guess now we're almost 3 years after its initial release. Probably my favorite movie. And I'm not a person who really claims favorite movies. My mind doesn't really work that way. I like a lot of different things, but it's a movie that is very, very dear to my heart, and that just transported and moved me the first time I saw it, and continued to do it. And movies, even the movies I love, very rarely affect me emotionally over and over and over again, and in fact maybe increase their force a little bit with each viewing. And The New World is on that elite list, and it's right up at the top. And yeah, I did start the blog partly because, I had just about a week before that, or actually just a few days before that, I had published a review of it in New York Press, which was a rave, and but I was reading other reviews of it, and I was in the minority at that point, although I think that maybe there's a little bit of reevaluation going on, perhaps not among the people who panned it in the first place, but maybe general audiences. And I launched the blog partly because I wanted to write repeatedly about this movie. And not just this movie, but a lot of movies, but particularly this movie. And that was the sense of urgency that I felt. And I had no idea whether or not anybody would actually read a blog that I started, so I was pleasantly surprised that a lot of like-minded people found it, and a lot of that was due to the New World and fans of it.
Well, and also, if I'm not mistaken, there was a post I remember early on where you commented, I believe, maybe you can clarify this, Village Voice critic Jay Hoberman wrote a piece or made comment of this the new swell of support for the New World in January. And
yeah, he did. It was actually I think it was in March of that year, and it was a piece. It was about the cult of the New World, I believe, was how he phrased it. And he not only mentioned The House Next Door as one of the key kind of disseminators of information about the movie, but he also wrote the article. The structure of his article was sort of a tribute to this particular piece that I wrote about the New World, which was extremely flattering, coming from somebody who read Hoberman for years before becoming a critic. So, yeah.
Well,
and it didn't seem that any of the things he had read online had changed his opinion of the movie, but it was great that he at least acknowledged that there was a groundswell of support for it.
Well, and let's get into kind of the minutiae details real quick on the New World now, because I've heard conflicting reports. Now, the critics, I'm assuming you went to one of the early New York critics screenings.
I did. I saw it twice. I saw the 150-minute cut twice.
Okay.
At press, actually, Yeah, it was twice. It was both at press screenings. And I saw it once, and then I went back and saw it again before it came out, which is something I rarely do, particularly at that time of year when there's so much coming out that you're supposed to see.
Right.
And then the 130, I guess, 5-minute cut came out. Mm-hmm. And I saw that a couple of times and wrote fresh reviews of that for the site. And then Keith Ulick, of course, who's been on your show, right. He contacted me wanting to do a comparison of the two cuts, which is actually it's archived at the house next door, and it's also on the Wikipedia page for The New World. If you go to the links down at the bottom of that entry, you'll find a link to it. And it was a pretty exhaustive comparison. And in fact, Keith's memory for the 150-minute cut was much more exact than mine. I think he might have seen it a few more times than I did. And we actually had some conversations about this 3-hour cut as well, and I'm really over the moon about it. It's really good, and of course, one could say that I am, I guess you'd say, a friendly audience for this cut. I mean, you're gonna obviously if you didn't like any of the other two cuts, you're not gonna like this one. It's more of the same but different. If, however, you like Terrence Malick and you like The New World, you got to see this cut because it's very interesting what's going on here. And I've talked about this with a number of people who've seen it. I feel like what Terrence Malick does is, and you and I have talked about this. I feel like he makes a cinema of moments. A cinema of moments, a cinema of feeling, a cinema of emotional realizations. And what he does is not beholden to the 3-act structure. It's not beholden to any of the rules that are laid down in the screenwriting books that you see at your local Barnes & Noble. And he's really, really pushing the art of cinema storytelling in unusual, unexpected directions. And it really is it's like simultaneously reading a novel and having a dream at the same time, what he does. And it's very musical, very free associative, and it owes at least as much, I think, to the poetry of Walt Whitman as it does to any filmmakers who are working now or have worked before. And I mention all that just as a prelude to say that there are certain filmmakers for whom the kind of hierarchical system that governs film criticism in this country is just completely inadequate. And I think Terrence Malick is one of those filmmakers. I think Wong Kar-wai is another. I think on a good day, Michael Mann is one of those guys. The Dardenne brothers, maybe. And what they do, you can't judge it in the way that movies are typically judged in the mainstream press in the United States. You can't say, my standing joke about the way film criticism is usually written in America is a chef labors in the kitchen coming up with some unusual variation on an old dish or perhaps something entirely new, and then they serve it up to the critics, and the critics proceed to write a piece telling you how this is or is not like a cheeseburger. It's like all they want is a cheeseburger. This isn't a cheeseburger. What is this? Well, there's a little part of it over here that sort of reminds me of a cheeseburger, but if you're looking for a cheeseburger, you don't need to be spending your money on this.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And I know that sounds reductive and insulting, but when you're looking at something that is as heartfelt and intuitive, musically intuitive, poetically intuitive as The New World, I think you've got to reach for the hyperbole in that way. And the distinctions, the hierarchical distinctions of the best film of the year, one of the top 10 films of the year, perfect in its own way, flawed but perfect, all these sort of descriptors that are usually tossed out in reviews are really, really, really pathetically not up to the task when you're thinking about this film. And in fact, when you think about multiple cuts of a movie, often what happens is a movie comes out in the theater, then there's a different version on DVD perhaps. It might be unrated, it might be longer or shorter, and reviews are written of that, and what they will tell you is this is better or this is worse than the first cut. Mm-hmm. I don't think any of the 3 cuts of The New World really can be judged by those measures. Not only is there no best version of The New World, the whole idea that you can finish a work of art, which I think is suspect at best. I think, I believe that old saying that an work of art isn't so much finished as it is taken away or stopped. Mm-hmm. I think you really got to go into it with that mindset when you're talking about these three different cuts, because all three of them feel like different movies. They really feel like different movies, and it's in a way, it's like, I keep going back to the idea of a dream. When you have a recurring dream, you don't have the same exact dream each time. Little things are different. The tone is different. The emphases are different. The point of it, the themes, if you will, the motifs change a little bit, and that's what I think he does here. And what he's doing is not only revisiting his work, but showing you the kind of ineffable nature of what movies are, and the fact that a movie that is 90 minutes or 2 hours or 3 hours is not the last word on the subject. Like in a way, what it does is kind of humble me as a viewer to see this, because the fact that he made two versions of this movie, which were quite different. They were similar at their core, but quite different in the way they went about telling the story. And then he's made this third version, and all three of them contain some of the same material. The beginning and the end are basically the same. There are several sections in the middle that are more or less the same, but the context is different. And a lot of times just simply shifting a shot from one part of the movie to another, or shortening it or lengthening it, or enlarging a moment of interaction between two characters from one cut as opposed to the next, changes the whole tone of a section of the movie, and changes, in fact, the tone of the whole movie, and makes it seem as though maybe there's a different point to the exercise. It's really just fascinating. And, at the risk of outing myself as the biggest geek who ever walked on the planet Earth, I'm really, really happy that Terrence Malick is making another movie, or so I've heard. But if he didn't make another movie, if in fact all he did was continue to re-edit this movie and come out with a new version every 2 or 3 years, I'd be perfectly happy.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the other movie. It is true, because Jack Fisk earlier talked about it, and it was interesting what he said. He said that when he was when they were making Days of Heaven, he thought, he goes, I wonder if one day Terry's gonna just make a movie with no dialogue. And then he realized on this new film, The Tree of Life, that they finished in Austin.
They're done with it. Wow.
They're done with it. He goes, on this film...
Done. And since we're talking about Malick, we have to say, quote, unquote, done.
Quote, unquote, done. He goes, it's not that there's no dialogue. He goes, this film, there's no light. He goes, we hardly use any lighting in this film. It's all this natural lighting. He goes,
wow.
It's going to look different. And he goes, so they... He saw they didn't print a lot, he says, when they were making it. Only when they thought a scene might be they were concerned about it, would they print it so they could see in dailies. He goes, but it looked. Jack Fisk says, he goes, I have a feeling that this film is actually going to change parts of cinema.
Really?
Yeah, he really feels that way. He apparently he told a story that he was talking to Malick a couple weeks ago. He goes, this film, he goes, I gotta try to get it out of my system. It kind of ruined me. He goes, because now every film that I'm gonna work on is gonna look like a film.
That's exactly how I've been thinking about this entire thing. This whole enterprise that Malick is involved in.
Mm-hmm.
It reminded me. It sounds like a strange comparison, but do you remember the Albert Brooks movie Defending Your Life?
Right.
You remember when Rip Torn explains to him that one of the things that happens to you in the afterlife is you learn how to use every part of your brain?
Right.
And the people who live on Earth only use, I think it's like, 7%. Right. He calls them they call them the 7%ers.
Right.
And for a variety of reasons that are really too complicated to go in here, most of commercial cinema is the province of the 7%ers, in that there are certain things that they're expected to do. To be fair to the filmmakers, a lot of times they can't do anything but that, because they're not going to get any money to make their movies if they try to do anything else. And even minor variations on the way things are supposed to be done are greeted with skepticism or hostility by the critics, and often by the audiences as well. And the marketing department, which says, how in the hell are we going to sell this? This isn't a hamburger. So in that sense, it's kind of a miracle that Malick has made 4 movies and is about to release a 5th, even though there was a 20-year gap between movies 2 and 3.